I hope you like the title. W.D. Gann and Astrology, the Master Time Factor and Other Myths, and how bullshit baffles brains. No, I'm not going to convince anybody who believes in astrology, because it doesn't matter what I say, they won't believe it. I have never, ever, ever heard anybody predict anything using astrology. Ever. Okay, that's a fact. You'll find people who will go and say something after the event. You'll find somebody will find something that somebody said, and you might find one person who says the correct thing, but 97 million people said the wrong thing. And W.D. Gann's work has really, in my opinion, been hijacked by the astrology community. So I thought I'd actually show you what Gann actually wrote about astrology. And he wrote this in 1919 on page 15 in a magazine called the New York Herald magazine. And he writes the following: "An astronomer can predict to the minute when an eclipse is going to occur, but you would not consider him a prophet, would you? Of course not. He is simply making use of mathematics based on known laws of motion of the planets in their orbits. I have found in my research that the Chinese understood all these laws and computerized the coming of eclipses thousands of years before the Egyptians and whoever they are. It is marvelous the knowledge that the ancients had. In making my predictions, I use geometry and mathematics just as an astronomer does, based on immutable laws which I have discovered. There is nothing supernatural or weird about it." Okay, now I'll let you read the rest of it, but basically he's saying I use geometry and mathematics. Okay, that's it. Okay, and then down here he writes a bit about planets and things, which has got something to do with it, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with astrology, birth signs and all the rest of it. Okay, let's call it a false flag. Now, Gann wrote it himself, so you can believe it or not believe it. Also, Gann was an incredibly religious man. In fact, his last book he wrote was called The Magic Word, which is basically about the Bible, etc. And if you read a lot of his work, he'll talk a lot, he'll put little quotes in from the Bible. And in fact, even if you look at the very end of this, he's talking about one of the Old Testament prophets, Elijah, at the end, which is the coming of the second coming of Christ, I believe. Now, the Bible says lots and lots of things about not using astrology. Yeah, it's not a good thing. So, like I said, I'm not trying to convince people who are into astrology, because it doesn't particularly matter what I say, but unfortunately there's a lot of people out there who are new to the works of W.D. Gann who get to believe the rubbish that they get told. I've been looking into this now for 30 odd years, and I've never, like I said at the beginning, I've never seen any convincing evidence that it works, even slightly. So what we're going to do now is hopefully prove that I'm right. And this is based on some videos I've been doing over the last 3 or 4 years on the S&P, drawing angles the way that Gann said you should actually draw angles, using the correct master time factor, which I've hidden, but it's pretty simple if you want to work it out for yourself, or if you want to become a client, then I'll just tell you. So hopefully enjoy. Now, unexpectedly, I'm doing a part 6 to my series, So You Think You're Doing Gann Angles. And basically, I started off with part 1, and that's what it looked like at the time. And just very quickly, unless you want to go and watch the videos again, then I basically show you the major angles, and the major angles with a correct master time factor applied. We've got 16 by 1, which gave us the high here, which I discuss in the part 1. Then the -8, now that actually does work, but you can't really see it, it didn't last very long. -4 will be the next major Gann angle, which was there, which I had on the chart when I did the part 1. Halfway between 16 and 8 is 12. 12 gave you exactly the top that was made. Halfway between 8 and 4 is 6. 6 gave you exactly the top that was made. So those I showed you with the benefit of hindsight, but I knew about those before because I've been talking to clients about them. And then halfway between 8 and 12 is 10, and 10 gave you where the market stopped on this weekly chart, as you can see. Twice 10 is 20, and 20 gave you the first reaction that was made up here. Then it gave you a false flag entry here because it's now a trend line, so anybody with a ruler would see it's a possible trade, therefore it's probably not going to last. Half of 20, half of 10 is 5. Halfway between 4 and 6 obviously is 5, and that gave us the next major top. And then part 2 was talking about angles coming up from the low to give buying opportunities. Part 3 then continues the angles coming down from the high, and part 5 carries on with the angles coming down from the high, and part 4 is about the angles coming up from the low. So I'm just going to be talking about part 1, part 3 and part 5. And so then I had on the next one, which was a 3x1, which is half of 6 of course, which is half of 12, and half of the next one after that one is a 2, and then I had a -1x1 on, I think, and it looks something like that. And then we moved on to when I did part 2, and you can see the angles without the benefit of hindsight. You can see the 4x1 did work. That's 2 weeks that it fell. Then it got to the 3x1, which gave us the next top into the future. Now again, I wouldn't trade it again, I'm not interested a second time. Then it hit the 2x1, and it happened to be exactly the top of the market, and that's when I did the video part 3 showing you where I found the next couple of tops on the market. And then we carried on, then I carried on, should I say, and I did the 1x1 for the future. The 1x1 actually worked for a couple of weeks, but not for very long. And since now I can't particularly do any more angles now because it's just getting flatter and flatter and flatter, and as they get flatter the angles get closer and closer and closer, and so that's why, oh sorry, must have done a part 5. Probably the part 5 was talking about the 1x1, and then the next top here was made in a 1x2, etc. But go and watch part 5 to go and see the whole thing. And so that's what that video was about, and most of, well, everything I did after part 1, all those angles I put on YouTube before the tops were actually made. In other words, what it's showing you is the markets are actually predictable. Okay, they're not predictable in it will get to a certain price on a certain date. They are predictable in a kind of, any of people out there know about chaos theory, they are attracted to certain points, but how they get there is uncertain. But when they get there, they change. So like I said, it's more to do with chaos theory. I don't know when it's going to get there until the day it's going to get there. So when I put this 3x1 on before the market ever got there, okay, so I put this back in 2010, I didn't know it was going to get there on that date. So you're going to say, well, what use is that then? Well, what day do you know that it's got to the angle that you put on before the market got there? Well, it's obvious, the day it actually physically got there. Now, something that I don't do is I don't draw angles from tops to get future tops, or I don't draw angles from lows to get future highs. In other words, I use highs and rising to get future. I use tops to get tops, and I use bottoms to get future bottoms, but I don't use bottoms to get tops, and I don't use tops to get tops. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert something from our training video library, which I did back in 2002, which explains what I think are common mistakes that people make when people do angles. I mean, there's a whole subject on it, but you can see through the rest of my video. So what I'll do is I'll insert that here. Now, a few things that people tend to do wrong are as follows. And it's basically this, it's actually rising to a rising angle. So you can see here that we've drawn an angle from a low, the market's fallen below the angle, and then it rises. And we get to the angle again, and people think that that is a good time to short the market. Well, it usually isn't. The reason being is it basically normally does the following. It might work there, or it might just go straight through. But if it does work, it tends to do this. It comes down, encourages people to go short of the market, and then it usually does something like that. And then it either tops out here and comes down, and it could be more than 3, it could be 3 or 4 times. Okay, so it could do something like that, or it just doesn't work at all. So I'm not interested when things rise to rising angles. And the same thing applies when you, I don't draw out rising angles from tops. So an example of that would be this. So as you can see, in this particular case we've drawn an angle from a high going upwards, which I would never do. But if you have, it might look something like that, and you might be tempted to think that that's a good reason to short the market. But again, what usually happens, I mean, sometimes they work, but what usually tends to happen is the market actually goes higher. So it comes down and then it goes back up again, and then it might go. Okay, but you never know exactly where the top's going to be, so I never do that. I never draw angles from highs to get future highs. Now, exactly the same rules apply on the downside. When you, to get shorting opportunities, well, you reverse the rules basically. It should be self-explanatory. So, hopefully that made sense. So basically, I don't usually draw angles from highs to get future highs. However, we're going to do it in this particular case just to show you how absolutely unbelievable Gann's techniques are, if done correctly, because as I've said in many of the videos in the past, the vast majority of stuff that you see talked about Gann is frankly just complete and utter twaddle. However, basically what we're going to do now is we're going to do these numbers that are coming down from the high, but we're going to do them going up. And bear in mind what I just showed you in the video. What usually happens if they work is they don't usually last. So when you rise to a falling angle, you tend to get big movements, okay, like these here. However, when you rise to rising angles, they tend not to be that good, and there are far better ways of finding tops of markets than using angles rising from tops to future tops. However, what I'm going to do is do that now. So that's one that goes down 1 point per master time factor. So now we're going to do one that goes 1 point up per master time factor. Now you're going to see in a minute that that doesn't work. Okay, now I'm just going to get rid of these lines because okay, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change to the daily chart so we can see this a little bit clearer. But notice that my software allows me to do this quite easily without being able to see the top that was formed here. So we change the daily angle. Now notice that the angle is in exactly the same position as it was on the weekly chart. Okay, so you can see the 1 by 1 coming down from the, that's drawn from the high that I showed you back in 2007, is in exactly the same position, and so is the 1 by 1. Now when it got to the 1 by 1, it basically just it stopped for a day or two, but basically it didn't show any weakness. You can see that it kept making higher bottoms, so there's nothing there. Now the next major angle after that one is twice that, which is 2. And the 2 by 1 actually gives us the high that was made here. And I always cut the angle when it gets broken. One of the big mistakes that people make doing any kind of technical analysis is they stick lines all over a chart. The ability to make all this work is knowing which lines to keep on and which lines to take off, which obviously is a massive subject and is covered in our training courses. Now try to 2 by 1 is a 4 by 1, so those are classic Gann angles with the correct master time factor applied. Okay, but with the software that you've got at the moment, you will not be able to do what I'm showing you here. Okay, so that's one for the future, and maybe I might do a part 7. We'll see what happens when or if it gets there, and that's the critical thing. If it gets there, I am not saying it will get there. Okay, now on the angles coming down, I showed you the numbers between numbers. Now the easiest one to understand to start off with is the number that's halfway between this one and this one. Halfway between a 2 by 1 and a 4 by 1 is a 3 by 1. And the 3 by 1, again I cut the price when it goes above, but remember these are set geometric lines, they are put on the chart before the market gets there. Can you see that it gave you the top of the market that was made here? Now, why did the market top out here? Well, it's actually half this angle here. It's half of a 3 by 1. It's the number that's halfway between a 1 by 1 and a 2 by 1. And if you look at Gann's courses on angles, you'll see that he says that the angle that's halfway between this one and this one is a 3 by 2. And you can see that the first time it gets there, which is here, of course so it's easy to see, can you see that it was where the market went and topped out? These are set geometric lines. Okay. Now, there are minor angles, okay, and you can always fit things in after the event, but there is an angle that's halfway between this one and this one. Now, I'll make it a weak line, but if you add that number to that number, so it's 3 and 2 plus 2 and 1 gives you 5 and 3. And if you put a 5 by 3 on, can you see that it's not physically halfway between those two, but can you see that it's where the market stopped? What's between a 3 by 1 and a 2 by 1? 2 and 1 plus 5 and 1, 2 and 1 plus 3 and 1 is 5 and 2. If you put a 5 by 2 on, can you see that it's where the market stopped? There are no other places where the market has stopped apart from when it got to these angles. So why did the market top out here? Well, what's between this one, a 3 by 1, and a 4 by 1? Well, it's a 7 by 2. And you should be able to see that the top was made at that level. So I thought we'd agree, absolutely amazing.